Time for all the things.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. This in general, in case anybody's interested. Hey. Almost there, getting the Facebooks ready.
Bring your questions, y'all.
Alright. Shared on all the things. I think we're good to go.
Jealous.
What's that?
3090. Someone give me 3090s.
Going to our faces here. What's up, everybody? Getting all set up. Think we got everybody in here. All the streams are going. Everything's rolling. A lot of people filing in already. Man, what's up, y'all? Get your questions ready. We're going to start rolling here in a second, and we'll try and hit as many questions as possible. I've got a laundry list of things I want to ask as well.
Yeah, seriously.
Ask all the things. Someone in our Slack, rad scientist. He's like, question number 1, did you come from outer space? All right. Cool. I think we're ready to start rolling audio. If you want to start recording.
All right.
Test.
You are hearing me
Testing.
talk. Okay. I am excited. All right. Mr. Toy.
That's me.
All right. Everybody rolling?
I'm rolling,
Everybody
yes.
All right. We're going to do a sync clap. It'll be 1, 2, 3 clap. All right. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Octane
You
Daddy.
hear that echo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Octane Daddy in the house. Oh, man.
Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah. When will the new RTX 3000 GPU be on render?
Yeah, I'm gonna get a little notepad ready here so I can make sure I'm saving all of these. So we're gonna start out the show. Got a couple things we gotta do, our housekeeping, so to speak. And,
Let's do it.
And then we'll be good to go. All right. Everybody ready?
Yep.
All right. Here we go. What's up and welcome to another Mograph Mocast. I'm Dave.
And I'm Matt, and joining us today is one of my favorite people in the entire world, Mr. Jules Urbach from Otoy.
Hey.
And Mograph is a supplement to our site, mograph.com, which is a motion graphics tutorial site with tutorials, plugins, podcasts, and other Mograph stuff. And on the show, we talk about everything ranging from motion graphics to Cinema 4D, After Effects plugins, render engines, doing business, doing taxes, being a contractor, or working for the man, you can email us info@mograph.com. Let us know what you think about the show. Questions, comments, concerns, grievances, topic ideas, guest ideas, artist suggestions, and whatnot. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, mograph.com. Send us all the things and let us know what you want to hear about. You can be sending us noob stuff. You can be sending us advanced stuff, and we'll try and hit up the new stuff. I don't know about the advanced stuff. We'll see. But we love getting your feedback on everything, like this one from Daniel, who says, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed the course Stop Being Afraid of Houdini. It was one of the best and most informative and easy to understand Houdini courses I've ever taken. I heard that there's going to be a sequel, and I wanted to check that there's an ETA for it if true. Looking forward to the next one. Keep me posted. Now, I like that the rumors are already out that there's a part 2. We have touched on that a little bit. I'm actually going to talk to Mark this week and kind of lay out our timeline and our plan, because we are going to have some 18.5 updates that are going to be in the existing course, which is really cool. So you can, if you already have the course, if you're learning it right now, or if you're thinking about buying it, don't worry, because there will be 18.5 updates coming to it. So it's not like you'll have to buy something else. And then also, I would love for there to be a part 2. If there's going to be a part 2, it's not going to be like, here's 18.5. It's going to be more like, here's some new stuff that wasn't covered before, new things you can learn how to do that also include 18.5. So don't worry about buying the course and then it getting outdated. He's always updating. So make sure you check that out, mograph.com/classes. And we also have the whatchamacallit, as Matt says, creating the Unreal. So we did some streaming with Windbush, Windbush was streaming, and I like hopped on, and then EJ hopped on, and some other people, like EJ's brother was there. We were all hanging out, and we were talking about Unreal and motion graphics and things, but we were playing Mario Kart at the same time. And so if you want to check out Windbush's Twitch channel, make sure that you check that out, because that's a lot of fun. He hops on there, and I think Saturdays are the days to play all the games, so that's fun. So check out his course, Creating the Unreal. There's a link that I'm going to put in the show notes from Peter Richards, who using the stuff he learned in the course did a cool little thing on Instagram. It's part of a project they were working on. It's like space stuff that was all done in Unreal. So check that out. And then just to let y'all know, there is a new mini course coming pretty soon. It's going to be a very quick 45-minute, just dive in and learn Spark AR with Cinema 4D in 45-minute course with Don Allen Stevenson III. And if you follow him on Instagram, you'll know that he's a great dude. Like, he is so energetic and just awesome. And we will be putting out more information about that soon. And we're going to have a late night special with him, I believe a week from this Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. That's tentative, but I'll put out some stuff like that on the, I'll put out some stuff for that on social. So you won't miss that. So check that out. If you know somebody who's in motion graphics and might want to learn one of these courses, gift it to them. Get on there, gift it to them for the holidays. I actually wanted to say something about the holidays. If you've had a fortunate year during COVID and all of this, I feel like I've had a fortunate year, and I feel like things could have been a lot worse for me this year. Share the love. Send somebody a gift. I'm not saying necessarily the course. I'm just saying in general, send people gifts. Like look at some of the people, gifts. Like a gift. Send people that are like in your life a gift. Your friends on the internet, your motion graphics friends. Send them something cool if you've had a fortunate year. What else? I also wanted to remind people to send their renders for the new front page. I've gotten a few of them so far, and we'd really like to make sure that we are featuring Mograph community users' renders on the front page. We think it would be really cool. So continue to send those info@mograph.com. Send us links, videos, whatever it is, because we want to feature our community's work on the site, because that will be cool. Of course, we're going to credit you and all of that. And Anything else? Anything else? A reminder: the 3D Motion Show, November 18th. Don't forget about that. It's a one-day show this time, so that'll be cool. I don't remember off the top of my head who's on. I know Noseman.
EJ Hassenfratz, Sarah Ann Gibson,
Nice.
Noseman, and oh boy, Daniel Krivorichko.
That's a tough one.
Even though
That's
I'm
a
pretty
tough
sure
one.
I'll
find out this week. We'll rehearse on Thursday. I'll find out the pronunciation. So make sure you check that out. That's going to be next week, November 18th. And lastly, I just had a question for you, Matt.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody can tell me how to fix this or something. But I'm using After Effects 2020. And
Sorry.
Yeah. And I was creating some stuff, and they've changed the way that they do their viewport scaling. Have you noticed this?
I'm not. I've opened 2020 once.
Okay.
2019 for the win.
You remember? Yeah, okay.
For life.
I think I know it's still kind of like this in Photoshop. If you're on certain magnification levels in Photoshop, some stuff will look kind of jaggedy.
Yeah, I don't know.
And well, just in Photoshop in general, just over the years, if you're like on a weird scaling like 46%, it will look kind of jaggedy, aliased. But if you go to like 50% or 100%, everything looks okay.
I think After Effects has always done that to me too.
Well,
like
After
I'm
Effects
at 100%
does.
and 50, if I'm full resolution but 50%, I have to scale it down to half resolution in order to see it really well.
Right.
I don't know.
And the problem is now when you do
2020 no longer supports OpenGL.
But when
Maybe
you would do fit to screen, what would happen is it would go fit to screen and it would look fairly decent. The problem now is that it looks like compression almost. Like if you have letters and stuff and fonts and things on the screen and you're only like at 50%, it looks like JPEG artifacting around everything.
Yeah.
It's like there's no good way to make sure your stuff looks good unless you have it at 100%, which is really annoying. I don't know if there's a way to fix that.
2019
Anybody knows a way around that. But just curious if anyone else had that.
Yep.
So I don't know. I just thought I'd ask. I think that
Warren's in the chat
it.
is saying, it no longer supports OpenGL, and that's caused a lot of issues.
Interesting. I don't know.
Thank you for that insight, Warren's.
That covers that. So we're gonna go to the fun part now that we've done our housekeeping here.
So really quick, Jules, is there a place where people can go to where should we send people to go watch this GDC talk that you just put out there? Would it be better to go on to like Facebook or YouTube or where?
Yeah, so the Facebook group, actually, one of the announcements I made on Friday just has a link to all my GTC talks, including this this last one. So just checking out the Facebook group is probably a good starting point, and that YouTube link is public for anyone to check out.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's full of fun information, which I think we're going to get a lot more in-depth.
Oh, yeah. We're going to get so in-depth. And just remember, we'll put about a bunch of this info in the show notes as well. If you want to listen to or view a repeat, of course, this will be saved after the show, and then we post this on iTunes with the full mastered tracks and whatnot. So, let's see. Oh man, my notes are plentiful. So I'm just gonna start out and say, all right, let's talk about Octane updates. Let's talk about what's coming in Octane, and I'll just try and cross things off my list if you happen to cover them, and then we'll go in and fill in the
Y'all
blanks.
are kind of on the cusp of releasing 2020, right?
2020
or 2020.2, right?
2, correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's about to hit release candidate, I would say, this week, and then we're hoping to have a stable version out this month.
Cool.
And we can cover that first if you guys want to dive into that. And then
sure.
There's also, when we put out 2020.2, when we had our first GTC talk in April, the work that we had really been wanted to focus on is stability, and that's still in progress. So 2020.2 has some of that in there, but that work is probably going to continue off, into the first quarter of next year. But there is some great stuff in there. For one thing, the 2020.2 release is faster than 2021. So 2020.1. So for example, on a 3080, you're getting about 600 OctaneBench versus 570. And so Ampere support is just faster on 2020.2. Dirt shading, all that stuff is much better. Open Color IO significantly improved. There's also a full compositing system in there, which is a halfway step towards the next release where we have.
Did we lose him?
Request for Octane was
there he is.
Can you guys hear me okay?
We lost you for a
lost you
second, but
second.
I think you're
We're
back.
all right.
You're
Oh
good.
no.
You're good.
All right. Yeah, so I was saying that a lot of the work that we have been that we're sort of putting out in 2020.2 is a precursor to a full AOV revamp that is going to be in the release after 2020.2. That'll have light path expressions, custom AOVs, and I was saying that that's the #1 requested feature for from Octane users is like, let's get AOV in a different place. So that's in there, and 2020.2 also just has initial support for hardware accelerated motion blur on Ampere. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. There's also a new scattering system. We've been working with Amit to take C4D scatter and move that into the core.
Mm-hmm.
And that also is going to make it so that when you export orbexes for the cloud or for other DCCs, we'll be able to export scatter much better. It won't take as long. It'll work better. It'll be essentially a native part of the Octane core.
Cool.
So
I will say that since I've been on 2020.15 or 1.5 for a while, for as long as it's been out, and the stability in comparison to past releases has just been incredible. Like, my biggest pet peeve with Octane for the longest time was when I'd say, okay, start rendering, and then I'd be like, oh wait, no, I want to stop. It would crash my entire system. But now it's like just that one little like quality of life thing of being able to stop my render immediately is awesome. And I've noticed like it's just it just feels a whole lot more smoother.
and that's something you've been working on too, right?
Yeah.
The stability, getting error reports from users.
That's correct. I mean, stability is basically the #1 through 4 features that we're working on in different ways, because that obviously is something that affects the user experience enormously. I will say that it's not all on us. I mean, Nvidia's drivers have also gotten better. I mean, they started to support Octane explicitly with studio drivers. They do QA with us, which is great. Cool. So I think that as long as you're on the very on the latest drivers that we sort of say, hey, these work great with Octane, and you're using 2020.1.5 and you're using Amit's latest fixes and the actual C4E plugin, the experience that people are reporting us is a lot better. And we're nowhere near done with all the accessibility that we have on the roadmap. We're specifically currently working on improving out-of-core memory, because that's something that's kind of been not touched since Octane 4. And the way that it works is that we request out-of-core memory from the system on Windows, and sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. And that's an issue. Yeah, and so that's why it's been kind of unstable. We've done our best to sort of work around that, but in the work that we're doing now that's going into 2020.2 and even into next year, we're redoing the way out-of-core memory works and NVlink, so that should actually be a lot more stable. And in tandem with that work, we're also going to, pretty much raise the limits on a single mesh, polygon limit to somewhere in the hundreds of millions or something. So that also will make it so that very large scenes will run much better in Octane. I mean, those are kind of like the very top feature requests from people is like, we want better stability, we want larger scenes, we want custom AOVs. So all those things are I also make sure my stream is going okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. Yeah. And so all of that is rather than waiting for one giant release, we just 2020.2 is as much of that's done, as of November as possible is going out there, and then we're going to have another experimental release with more stuff after. And we previewed some of that when we released 2020.2. We've got Boolean operations. We've got double the rendering speed for AI Lite. It's significantly faster, which is awesome. So as much as our TX has been speeding things up on on Ampere and on Turing, we're going to see hopefully even faster convergence and less noise with the releases that are following 2020.2.
Cool. So many questions.
I know.
In the chat. I'm having a hard time.
I've got them listed. I've got them listed here.
Okay.
I'm going to work backwards actually for a second. Okay. Is there maybe a possibility to use the out-of-core memory for mesh? Is that already in there? I thought it was already a thing, but maybe I'm wrong.
Oh yeah, no, out-of-core memory with everything.
Works.
It'll still, it'll render correctly.
Okay. All right.
We lost you for a
yeah,
second.
we lost you for a second.
Out of
Yeah.
core memory works
I'm
perfectly.
going to turn off. Yeah, I'm going to turn off my my iPad here, see if that helps conserve bandwidth. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's see if that makes a difference. Yeah, so it works with everything already. It just doesn't work as stably as we'd like. So we're going to work on improving that.
One of the questions we've seen in here a couple times is when will render be in the big exchanges so that you can?
Yeah, that's also a pretty frequent question. So we're working. I mean, obviously, Coinbase announced that they're looking at render. I've talked a couple times, even to Brian Armstrong, who's the CEO of Coinbase. We're working on getting them, support for render and others as well. It's not completely in our hands. I was hoping for this summer. I would say realistically, hopefully no later than early next year. And, we'll keep everyone informed. That's a big deal for us as well. Once we have render on larger exchanges, we want to go with ones that are basically partners, not just ones that just list the token willy-nilly. Then we can actually have liquidity. We can really scale render up. Mm-hmm. And I would say right now, render is more just like we want to get the product itself to work well. I mean, people love it. We've gotten better, product feedback in terms of positive user experiences we have even with Octane, which is fantastic. So people in general love the product, but we also have to balance that with the fact that we have people actually almost like Uber drivers, like making money, putting their nodes on the system and earning render tokens. And we want to make sure that's balanced. So scaling the network up, making sure the product works great are pretty fundamental pieces. And things are going to scale up significantly once it is on the exchanges and we have a lot more liquidity. But I'm actually not ungrateful for the fact that we have a little bit more time to actually get everything right before that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So, to answer the question is, at the very latest, early next year, I think, and hopefully, if we can, the end of this year for being on a larger exchange or multiple large exchanges. It's not just Coinbase we're talking to.
Cool. And somebody was asking as well if you could give some insight on how the tiers are calculated.
Yeah, so the tiers are, right now users have access primarily to tiers 2 and 3. And the way that we measure or differentiate those tiers is by priority. It's a little bit like on AWS, where we have, availability of certain nodes determines whether you can get it at a cheaper price or not. But the tier 3 nodes typically fall below a certain OctaneBench score. I think it's like, 300 or something right now. So users with a faster OctaneBench on their nodes that are essentially operating the nodes on the network will get those tier 2 jobs more frequently. And it's an algorithm that we change sort of week to week and month to month a little bit to make sure that it's balanced and that we don't have a lot of jobs that are stuck on tier 3 nodes that could be on tier 2. And so it is something though that is determined largely by the speed of your node, the reliability of your jobs in the past, and also one of the big differentiators as well is the amount of VRAM you have on your card, because that also is something that can really significantly speed up scene rendering. So it's a factor of between those things. Tier 1, which is currently only available on Google and AWS, that's actually something we've limited more through security, because that is when you send a job through Render Enterprise, which is tied to those tier 1 nodes, it's meant to be for rendering Marvel movies, which has been done on the cloud before with Octane. So it's that kind of security level. But we are planning to offer tier 1 to the decentralized nodes. There'll be there'll be a different level of security, but it'll pay out the same price. And that's more for render farms that are typically looking to do a full business around them. They have like 50 nodes, and there's a lot of render farms that are out there. And we just were talking to Drop Render on Twitter, like hey guys, just join Render, like just set it up alongside your current business. Mm-hmm. And those are the types that'll probably be closer to tier 1. But that's sort of how the tiers are set up. So we can even potentially add more tiers if there's a need for that. But I think the 3-tier system right now works pretty well, and a lot of jobs are going onto both tier 2 and tier 3. More than on the enterprise. Like, people I think are not quite as concerned about the security of the system. It's actually end-to-end encrypted, so the jobs are actually very secure, at least as secure as it is on most public render farms. And I think that satisfies the majority of render users. And there's, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 active render accounts that are have Octane subs, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I've used it. I've used it quite a few times, and what's been very impressive is the cost is surprisingly low for getting some of my render stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's also been very welcome, of course, to people on the artist side using render. And I think that what's interesting too is the I want to get it so that in your case, I know you're waiting for like one frame to kick in or whatever when you have a job with just a small frame. But as we get a lot more scale, even single frame renders you can just send off to the network. I think will go a lot faster. And I also think that it's the tiers themselves. I mean, tier 3 is really, really, really inexpensive, but tier 3 could also start to become faster for doing jobs. Tier 2 can be faster. So my vision is that the costs are largely going to be make render the cheapest possible option, but you're going to have multiple tiers that are going to surpass probably the maximum capacity that you can get on any render service. I mean, that's the beauty of scaling and decentralization, is we can add a lot more capacity, and we will in the coming months.
If someone wants to offer up their GPUs for render, is it still in beta to be able to do that, or do you have to contact someone, or is it the possibility of just hopping on and doing it? What's the process? Sorry.
So the process is really, we do want to whitelist people, because part of it is making sure that we, because there is a point where, as I said, we'll probably open the floodgates to a lot more nodes on the system. So we had a sign-up sheet. I mean, if you contact Patty, who's on all the forums on the Facebook group, just post to one of, or even tweet me directly at Otoy or at Jules Urbach. I'll just send you to the right place to get on there. The longer-term plan, I think, is something that is going to make it a lot simpler, where if you already have an Octane account and you're running Octane, you'll have a one-button thing, hook me up to render, and we'll run the client automatically, and that you'll essentially be whitelisted because you're already an Octane artist or user on the latest sub. So that's the plan for next year, is to make that happen, and to make it so that if you just want to have something running in the background that runs render jobs for others, those tokens can then get added to your account. You can then use those to render your own jobs later. And I think that is going to be really nice. We've never made it super simple for people with an Octane account to just join the render network in one step. That, I think, is also going to be make things very simple. But right now, it is sort of a whitelisted approach for being on the other side. There's a Slack channel that you can join once you're on there, that you can get a ton of guidance and info from a really strong community of node operators, and it's going well. I just think that because it's going well, we also don't want to mess it up until we're really sure that scaling to everyone and to larger groups isn't going to, is something that we can handle, in a way that keeps the system at the level of quality that it is now.
What I'll try and do here, I'm still taking down questions, but I'm going to go through my list, because I think some of what I have here is going to cover a lot of questions. So some of y'all may want to hold your questions to the end, because I may cover this, and if not, we'll circle back around. Okay, question number one for me is, these new video cards are out right now, the 3080s, 3090s. What are let's talk about the speed differences now that you're seeing on these new cards, for the people that are fortunate enough to have one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's easily double. Just OctaneBench, which is, we did update OctaneBench, when the Ampere cards, when the 3080s and so on came out, because Octane 4, for example, doesn't run on Ampere, and that was the last official OctaneBench, was version 4 from a couple years back. But the short answer is 3080 is double the speed of a 2080, 3090 is double the speed of a 2080 Ti, and that's at, just pretty much just in pure, at minimum, right? If you're going to be doing something that is improved with RTX acceleration, so if RTX on makes your scene render faster, it'll render even faster on the 3090. So that'll make the speed more like 2.5 times faster, sometimes 3 in certain cases. So that's, I think it's being conservative to say it's a doubling of the speed. And you can even see the RTX off scores are actually really, really impressive, because you can run OctaneBench now with RTX off if you wanted to see how it runs without RTX acceleration. But remember, OctaneBench is using these really old scenes that are pretty lightweight. They don't really benefit significantly from RT cores. But even so, they do get about a 20-30% speed boost. The results are the same, and RTX on is going to be the default pretty much with the next release. So, that's still a fairly conservative measurement. If we do another OctaneBench 2021, for example, next year, we'll probably put a lot more modern scenes in there. Like if you take some of these, motion graphics scenes from C40 off of Gumroad, those ones actually are closer to 3 times faster. And so my feeling is right now OctaneBench on a on a 2080 Ti is maybe 350, on a 3090 it's close to 670. 2022 though pushes that up further on Ampere, so it's closer to 700 with a 3090 on 2020.2, 600 on a 3080. Those are pretty remarkable scores. And I think when you get to 2021, when we start putting further Ampere acceleration code in there, which we're doing, we're continuously making RTX on faster, and we add some scenes that are more representative of more complex scenes. OctaneBench will probably be closer to 800 on a 3090, maybe even higher. I mean, that's what I was showing in the GTC talk, is that if you just take 40 modern scenes, including the older OctaneBench ones, and you average them together, you're getting closer to to 800 to 1,000 OctaneBench on a 3090. So that, if anything, OctaneBench currently is underselling the speed of your average scene on a 3090 or 3080.
Wait till you test those Cornelius Dammerick scenes.
Yeah,
we have. So he's given us permission to actually take some of his scenes and put them in a future OctaneBench. Same thing with People. Same thing with some of the other ones that we were testing internally. So yeah, those significantly test the the speed of Octane, and one of them even in 2020.2 went up to 1.6x faster on RTX because there's so much use of dirt nodes. That wasn't sorry, it's just the alarm in the office. That wasn't accelerated at all in 2020.1.5. Dirt node was not really using RTX. It is in 2020.2, so that makes that scene a lot faster, for example, which is great. And we'll keep pushing the envelope on making RTX faster for all these other types of things that are still leveraging CUDA cores more than RT cores. So there's still work to be done there.
Tokyo Megs was asking if it's double because they added the 2 shading operations per cycle or whatever that is. I heard something about that. What is that?
Yeah, it seems like so they're when the 3080s and 3090s were announced, if you look at the CUDA core count on what they're showing on the Nvidia site versus like the previous year, it's like double. And because they were saying that there were 2 operations per CUDA core, and I think that's what he's referring to.
Yeah. That's something where even at a certain point for us, there's a mystery as to exactly how the hardware gets, works. I mean, we do get what we can from NVIDIA, but all of us that are developing GPU renders consistently ask NVIDIA for more low-level info. But yeah, that seems to have made a difference. I mean, CUDA itself, no RTX is definitely significantly faster. I mean, it seems like it is even there, about double the speed. I will say that one thing that significantly has improved the speed on a lot of scenes, that are RTX, the benefit from RTX is that clearly the RTX cores or the RT hardware cores either double the speed or there's twice as many of them that contribute to that. And that also, by the way, makes an enormous difference for things like Brigade, which are we can talk about that later as well. That's a whole new rendering engine built starting with RT cores as the starting point. Just like when Octane was built, we started with CUDA and we didn't think about CPU rendering. You could build a brand new render that is designed around the fact that ray tracing hardware is now everywhere. And even a data point for us to share is that I think sometime this year, 51% of our users are on are on RTX hardware. That flip happened this year and it's only growing. So, and most of those are on 2080s or 2080 Ti's, which is pretty nice. And I think that that's kind of where, ray tracing hardware now is in the majority of Octane users' hands. It's time to start thinking about not just speeding up Octane, but also, building parallel efforts that could be leveraging whole new ideas around rendering, even final rendering, using RT cores more heavily. And that's something that we're working on with Brigade.
So here's a question. So jumping over to Brigade, what you were speaking about, where it's built upon RT cores and stuff like that. So when Brigade finally gets released, will it only be able to run on RTX hardware?
The answer to that is probably yes. We could go backwards and we could run on older hardware, just like we did with Octane. So the way that we developed Brigade is it's being built largely around the same way we built OctaneX on the Mac for Metal, right? It uses our cross compiler. We call it the Render SDK. It spits out CUDA. It spits out Metal or Vulkan. But on the PC and even on NVIDIA cards, we're using Vulkan because it's a game engine API. It's got lower level access even than CUDA or OptiX gives us, and that's one of the things that we've started to develop on. So that We could build all of the RTX core functionality into Vulkan, compute code and just run that on older hardware. That's kind of the option. But by the time that Brigade is sort of out there, we want to see how many people are actually trying to run it on older systems. We could definitely do it. I think the first release, just to speed things up and not hold the the release out any further, will probably be Nvidia, Windows only for now, and then we'll work on with RTX hardware, and then we'll work on support for Metal, which of course doesn't have ray tracing hardware and more. But I think we don't want to wait too much on that, and it'll be a lot slower. Like you will need 3 Pascal cards to match what one RTX card can do, right? I mean, it's that kind of speed up. But Brigade works with multiple GPUs, so if you have 3 1080 Ti's, I mean, it could run as fast as a single 2080 Ti potentially. But I think Ampere, 3080s are even faster. Like there's even more than a doubling of speed when it comes to Brigade, comparing that between 2080 and 3080 GPUs.
Before we get too far into Brigade, because I know everybody wants to hear about that, quick question from Ray Zero. He was asking about official training for Octane Standalone, because I think a lot of us are in cinema or whatever, and we're like comfortable with that. Then you open Standalone, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Is there a good training system somewhere that you know of for learning the standalone?
Yeah, something, first of all, I'm a standalone user. I do most of my testing, and that's why, a lot of the, a lot of my sort of scenes that I've tested, even feature development does happen in standalone. So I think that there are some tutorials out there. I'll need to look that up, and I'll certainly post it on the Facebook group.
Cool.
The other thing to point out is one of our goals is to probably heavily improve standalone and make it much more of a editor. I mean, it's right now it's pretty lightweight. It doesn't do a whole lot. It doesn't allow you to do animation. We're going to start to change that sometime next year and improve the interface. So, and that even touches on things like Sculptron, which is a sculpting tool with animation support. So kind of taking some of those pieces, putting those into standalone and allowing you to do a little bit more would make sense. And as we do that, I think that's when we'll invest a lot more time also into getting people to understand standalone better. One of the other interesting things about standalone development that I mentioned in the GTC talk is Ahmed has taken his C40 viewport IPR, which people love, and the node system, his node viewport, or his node UX in C40, which he built, and provided those as libraries that we can then put into standalone and even use those in other DCC plugins. That's more long term, but again, I think once we are underway with that work, we'll probably then look at standalone with all these pieces added, and then do a proper set of tutorials around it. But yeah, the current standalone does have, I mean, I know Lino's done tutorials. I know that there are things out there. Greg was one of our evangelists and developers. So I will certainly help point people in the right direction. But we're also holding back a little bit. We want to make sure that we get all these new pieces into the Octane core and standalone tools, probably by the middle of next year, and then also do a lot of tutorials around those new pieces.
Cool.
Now, here's a question for those who did we lose you?
Can you guys see me?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. I need to disable calls here.
Question for you, for the layman here. What is OptiX 7 exactly? I don't know what that is, and I keep hearing about it.
So it's a great question. It's a library that Nvidia has created, mainly for CUDA renders. So it's not something that you can really use inside of video games that use DirectX or even Vulkan. But it is an API that allows you to use the RT cores. And we ended up using that inside of Octane 2020 because the previous approach we took, which was taking Vulkan and mixing that with CUDA, it didn't work well. It just, those two APIs are not meant to work together. And OptiX 7 was NVIDIA's really the second pass at doing a custom API around RTX. And it's, OptiX 6 was actually pretty bad. That's one of the reasons we didn't use it. It was slow. It didn't work well. OptiX 7 fixed all of that. It gave us pretty much the same kind of speed we were seeing in DXR and in Vulkan with RT cores, but it added a lot more functionality that CUDA could leverage. And that's why you've seen, I think, all the major GPU renders switch to, not just OptiX, but leverage OptiX 7. So that's what it does. It's basically a very robust production-ready API around RT cores. There are some pieces of OptiX that are outside of just ray tracing, right? They have OptiX denoiser, which we don't use because the denoiser in Octane that we built ourselves, I think, is much better, or it's tuned for Octane. But for the most part, OptiX 7 is a proper API for production render to use to leverage NVIDIA's ray tracing hardware. It does a lot of things that are great, but there are things in Vulkan that are still lower level, which is why Brigade is leveraging that API, and probably will not be using OptiX, even though Octane does.
And Apple is supposed to make an announcement tomorrow, I think, about their chips. And so I'm sure the question is going to come up here in the chat about not only Mac integration, but I think a lot of people are going to want to know about AMD on PC as well, about just the current update.
Gonna ask that if no one else did.
Yeah, so I get that question a lot, and I'll start with the Mac. So I think this week we're putting out public release 4 of Octane X, which has, and I know Ahmed's also working on a Cinema 4D plugin with that. That has, again, PR3 had all the features, OSL, all that in there. This fixes a few more bugs. And the Big Sur version, the macOS 11 version of PR4 that we have in closed beta right now, will work on Intel. It'll work on old AMD GPUs.
Ooh.
It'll work on the newer AMD GPUs that have been announced, the RX 6000s. Whenever those come to macOS, we can support those. We have not tested that ourselves. We just have driver support for them. And it'll also work on AGX, or Apple Silicon, which is I don't know what tomorrow's announcement specifically is going to show, but the bet is that it's going to be new Macs that are using Apple Silicon. So all the work we did to get, by the way, Octane running on the iPhone and iPad, it actually was fairly straightforward to get the same set of features running really nicely on the new Mac hardware that utilizes that. So with that, I mean, I feel like the work that we've done to rebuild Octane on top of Metal and even Vulkan is in a pretty good place. To AMD, support on Windows. Well, we don't have Apple on Windows, right? Getting AMD drivers to be in the shape that they are on Metal. So even though we can compile Octane for Vulkan, and we actually have all of Octane on Vulkan, not using a single line of CUDA, it's running on Nvidia Vulkan, the same Nvidia Vulkan drivers that we're using Brigade. We have been stuck on Vulkan drivers from AMD and Intel, right? Both of which work on Metal on Windows for a while, and it's because there's bugs and issues compiling that code on Vulkan Windows that we just don't have on the Metal side. So that maybe it's because Apple's pushing for better driver support, or who knows. But we've talked to AMD mainly through the process of getting Octane on Mac working, and we've asked them for support and help getting Vulkan going. So they're on it, but we haven't had a ton of movement. But the good news is, I suppose, is that once they fix those drivers, Octane will just work. It'll work the same way it does. Nice. Frankly, it'll be Octane X basically on Windows. And the speed on AMD cards is pretty good. I mean, you can get 400 and something, OctaneBench on a 440, I think, on a Vega 2. Those are expensive cards, but those on Windows machines should give you the same. And with AMD now having hardware ray tracing support on the newer Navi cards, we will eventually make sure that we support those as well, both for Brigade, which we're working, on Metal version for that, and also for Octane. Not sure on the ETA on that, but it's definitely in progress on our side.
And to segue into the Brigade section here, you've got Octane updates for Unreal and for Unity.
Yep.
Right. What is new in that area?
So I think, Octane for Unity has been in a pretty good place for a while. So there's nothing, crazy there. It is one of the unique integrations of Octane where you don't actually download a plugin. It's within the Unity editor. You just load a scene that has any Octane data or load a sample, and Octane gets pulled in. I mean, I think the biggest updates on both of those is those are now available on Metal on the Mac. So Octane for Unity and Unreal didn't exist even on CUDA on the Mac. They're now both available for Mac users on macOS Catalina. And Octane for Unreal in particular has some really interesting elements that we're going to sort of keep doubling down on. So one of those is that you can not just import an Orbex proxy, you can load an Orbex file and convert that into native Unreal materials and scene elements. And that's pretty cool, right? So we're going to keep working on that. And the idea there is that you can essentially, obviously Maxon's also working on getting integration with Cineware in there, which is great, or Datasmith. But, one thing that those things miss is you don't get all the Octane materials or lights and all that. So Octane for Unreal will definitely start to have better importing support. We're working on that. It already works pretty well, but it'll continue to work even better. And then we're also going to be working on connecting all of the Octane DCCs. So multi-render was something we showed in GTC where you can have multiple renders.
Yes.
But we're also going to make it so that you can have multiple DCCs connect to each other and do essentially live linking. There's going to be many ways you can live link things to each other, but being able to use C4D to live link into Unreal, for example, you know, Maximo may have a solution. I mean, certainly things like Lightwave and Modo could do that already, but we want to have something that's just direct between two Octane DCCs talking to each other. And that's something that we're probably going to enable in across the board sometime middle of next year. That'll be great for Unreal. That way you can work in C4D, you can see that show up live linked into in Unreal or Unity. And that also means you could take, for example, if you want to have a proxy or a set of geometry, you can have Sculptron, for example, used to drive that, or Blender, and assign, you know, different scene elements to have different editors associated with that. That's something that I've wanted to do for years in Octane, going back to Octane 3, but it's kind of coming together more, you know, more nicely now. And I think that by mid next year, you'll have that, you know, DCC linking. And I think for Unreal artists, that's going to make a big difference to be able to keep working in C4D and Octane and having that kind of work. Not just through, you know, live linking or you know, sending data that gets saved to Unreal, but being able to do that even live would be really nice. So
one kernel to rule them all. Yeah. I really love the idea of working in Brigade just with this whole real-time thing. Like if y'all have watched the video, the GTC, like that Brigade stuff is just mind-blowing. And the fact that you could be working and you could just flip that down, you know, I'm on path tracing, okay, now I'm on Brigade. A lot of people getting into Unreal for that reason, because they can do all of this real-time stuff. But if you're going to be able to have that inside of something like Cinema 4D, man.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Brigade, because I think that even sort of the strategy of why that exists and how does, you know, what does that mean when you have Octane and Brigade, and even we have a third renderer working called Anime Render. It's not a, you know, very
excited about that one.
Yeah. But you know, all three of those, well, actually the other two besides Octane were kind of meant to go into Octane, and we did have a toon shader at one point, and we still have toon, you know, shading in Octane. But you know, the thing that we discovered, and we were going to take both Brigade and the Anime Render and bake those in about a year ago, we decided to sort of diverge those and make those three just independent renderers for various reasons. For one thing, they kind of need to be. I mean, there's a lot of stuff inside of Octane that's designed for Octane output, whereas Brigade is taking a lot of shortcuts. That's why it's so much faster. I mean, in a lot of cases, it looks just like Octane, which is great. In others, not so much. It doesn't have spectral rendering. It doesn't quite have all of the nodes that Octane does. It will get there over time. So the idea was, if you wanted to have something that is, you know, the appeal of Unreal, right, is that it is real time. It's instantaneous feedback. If we can get you something that's close to Octane quality, but has the same speed as the Unreal Engine viewport, with, you know, basically no noise and settings where you can kind of adjust even the noise level to be maybe a little bit higher. Like Brigade has a little bit of noise. We're not like hiding it or trying to make it so you see nothing. Right. You can kind of set that, but there's, by design, it's just got a little bit of noise. It resolves in this one frame, and then you have something that is final frame quality. And all of that work is meant so that during, you know, during the artist development process, you can actually use Brigade to see exactly what you're getting. And there is a couple of promotes, but Brigade also has, just like Octane, has its own path tracing kernel, its own direct lighting kernel, its own info channels. So those things are all, you know, the info channels, you probably could just use those in Brigade because they're identical to Octane's, but they're really fast. Like we showed that a year ago where we had ambient occlusion pass and it was running at 4K 60 and it was instantaneous. So that kind of stuff is straightforward. And then direct lighting in Brigade was meant to be the same, you know, where it wasn't full path tracing, but it looked really good, really nice. And it was, again, 4K 60. The work that we were doing this year, and when we started to show some of the newer Brigade scenes that were running both with, you know, with older Octane scenes and showing those running with path tracing, was meant to see if we can get there with path tracing. Now, we're not quite able to get 4K 60 on an interior scene with many lights. Like it's more like 1080p, 12 frames a second. But that's still pretty good, and
really
that's
good.
It's really good. So it's one of those things where we want to kind of get Brigade to be, the path trace kernel of Brigade to be pretty much the same as Octane's in terms of the expectations. There's no baking, there's no radiance cache in there. It is a little bit noisier, blurry if you're moving it really fast, but you can kind of set it so that it's you know, it doesn't feel too different than Unreal. And if you put multiple GPUs in there, it also increases speed, just like with Octane. So it's pretty exciting. You know, when I was making a lot of those videos that I showed in the presentation, I was surprised myself. Like, wow, this looks pretty close to Octane. In the case of that Japanese garden, it was identical. There's no difference. So what my experience was that outdoor scenes, I think, in Brigade are probably going to be pretty much look the same as they do in Octane. Interiors are a little different, and even on the truck scene, that blue truck with the metal, spectral rendering, people wonder, like, what's so special about that in Octane? It's not that, you can't get great, beautiful results without spectral rendering. Most renderers don't have it, and you see tons of beautiful things coming out of it, but it's harder because you have to do a little more fakery to get, the metals to look right and things like that. So Brigade has that same problem, but it's also not a problem that hasn't been overcome in other non-spectral renderers. And I think my goal for the next couple of months, and maybe we'll show more of those results in the next month or two, is how does Brigade handle, interiors, lots of lights, archviz, things like that.
Yeah.
And we showed a little bit of that in April, and we showed a little bit more of that, in October. But I think that we're working heavily on making it so that if you're using those built-in spotlights, the Spectron lights that we have in Octane, those will look really, really nice in Brigade. And hopefully that's something that right off the bat will be good enough for final renders, walkthroughs, and the like. And to sort of, for those that aren't aware how we're making Brigade work inside of our existing plugins. So Octane itself has something that we're adding called Multirender, which basically takes Octane away and adds any other renderer as a deep inside the engine. And that's how we're going to add Brigade. It'll just work, it'll work like you're switching to a different kernel, but it'll be a whole other renderer. And what we showed was not just our own renderers working this way, but even Hydra-based, Hydra's Pixar's API for plug-in renders. We have that working with Arnold. We have it working with Cycles. We could take any renderer that has a Hydra render delegate that includes, I think V-Ray has one, Redshift. I mean, all this could work in this system. RenderMan, of course. And it's pretty neat. I mean, that means that, for example, our Unreal or Unity engines could load those other renderers. We can use that system. Yeah. And I think that first of all, we have a partnership with Autodesk. So Arnold itself is something that we're supporting on Render on the cloud service. And while we could just take Arnold Kick file or ASS file and run it through Kick, we want to work with the Arnold team to make it so that the scenes that are from inside C4D or Maya could be basically sent to render and render on all our engines, right? And if we come up with standards where material conversion, shaders, we pick standard surface there, sort of Uber material as a starting point. It's going to help significantly make it so that the materials that you create in one engine can work in another. And that's where multi-render also, came from, is we want to be able to provide a real-time viewport. Can you guys see me okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that, so multi-render is designed to provide a real-time viewport feedback for other renderers, and then that can translate to render itself, so you can do offline renders with multiple render engines. And we have a lot of partners that we're working with in terms of adding their renders to render. We've only announced Arnold because that's the furthest along, but there's more that we can do with that. And I think that if you look at the compositing system that's in Octane 2020.2, where you can take multiple render passes now and do almost like After Effects or Photoshop style layering inside of Octane, which is pretty cool. That works with multiple renders as well. So you can actually render Arnold on the CPU, Octane on the GPU, take the volume pass from one, drop it into another, use Cryptomat. So all of those things are in play. And I've seen a lot of examples where people take, Octane and another render, like Redshift, for example, and kind of composite things. Why not make that easy?
Yeah.
And as long as you're, as long as you're a subscriber paying for some version of our software, I don't really care how, we want to be an open system. And that, I think, is the future of what O20 wants to be. And Octane's an amazing, great renderer. We have other renderers we're building, but we also want to make sure that whatever tools you choose to use, they all work together really nicely with the system that we're building.
And Brigade is going to be, are you going to have an alpha and a beta and all of that before it comes out? Like, I'm sure people want to know, when can they at least get their hands on it to play with it and experiment with it?
Yeah, so I think the realistic time frame for that is, the soonest we could put out anything would be mid-December. And the reason for that is the drivers that I was mentioned that Nvidia has for Vulkan that allow Octane to work and Brigade to work, those aren't public yet. Like, we have a development driver. So I think mid-December is the earliest those will be public. And then we have to see what makes sense. So what we have currently working is a standalone tool. Like, you see all the screen captures I've done at Brigade has IamGUI, which is sort of this developer programmer art interface. You export from an Orbex from Octane, you put it into Brigade, and you can test it out. That's kind of cool. We might put out a demo of that, but I think what people really want is something that is closer to having integration working inside of C4D, for example. Yeah. So I think that, I don't know whether it makes sense for us to put out something that we let artists do a whole lot with before that point. But if there's like this huge demand, like, we want Brigade standalone, we don't mind exporting, we don't mind all these things, you know, we could put that out there in December. I just think it's better to kind of wait till we have the DCC integrations a little further along.
Yeah.
That might make it more useful. So we're open to feedback on that. We also don't want to create too much work or supports for things that are just not quite there yet either. I mean, that's why a lot of stuff, even with Octane X for Metal, we still have a closed beta because it does help significantly reduce the amount of work we're doing chasing down bugs when we have a very focused group. So we might do a closed beta for Brigade first to get people that are super interested in providing feedback,
for that,
that kind of input. And then when the time that it goes out to all users, it'll be further along. The anime render though is actually built as a render delegate for Hydra. So it could work, for example, in Houdini Solaris or in Maya. And you have users say, well, we don't care. We just want to get that, that anime render inside of those tools. So can we get that sooner? And we're looking at that as well. But I would say that the time for Brigade is sometime in April or May of next year is when we're trying to get something out there that'll be a pretty polished beta with DCC support integrated. And it might slip, it might come out sooner or later. I mean, it's definitely something that we want to get out there as quickly as possible, and we'll see where we're at. I mean, I think from my perspective, it was so much fun to play with the tool that I had. It was the first time as I was making those videos where you can see Octane scenes fully working in there. But we have a lot of work to do. For example, we want to get Embergen integration into both Octane and Brigade.
Yes. I want you to get Embergen
yeah.
into
So those are parallel paths as well. But one of the things that we're, the goal with Embergen and Octane is that we do want to try to give you something that's like, I mean, obviously there's great tools out there. We love Jawset and the TFD guys, and Houdini's great. But if you had something that was in the core of Octane that you didn't need to go and save out VDBs, and it just worked everywhere, it worked whether you're inside of Unreal or Unity or C4D, you could kind of simulate these things. Those work live. One thing I did show in the GTC video is we do have Embergen volumes now rendering in Brigade, and it's still running in real time with volume rendering and scattering and all of that.
Yeah.
I must have missed that because I was going to ask you about VDBs in Brigade specifically, whether they're going to take a render time hit because they're having to calculate too much.
Yeah, well, so VDBs are it's a file loader, right? It's a file container that we then turn into something internal that we can then render. So one thing that Embergen kind of allows us to do is we can take sort of a snapshot of the Embergen simulation, don't export VDB, but just render that live inside of Brigade, and that is working pretty well. It drops the frame rate from I don't know, on my RTX 5000 from 30 to 15. So you do get a speed hit when you're rendering volumes, but it's still real time, and we can still speed that up more. So I think VDBs and Embergen, whether you're loading it from VDB and then rendering it, or rendering it live from Embergen, simulating it in real time, or other tools, it'll still be real time. It'll still work really well. It won't be this exactly like many other things. It won't be the same quality as Octane. I mean, Octane can do multiple scattering inside of a volume. Brigade is just doing, I think, single scattering right now, but we can also try those sliders. So yeah, the volume rendering for VDBs is definitely going to be supported in Brigade, as will Hair, as will Vectron. All those things will work, but we're probably not going to have everything in the very first beta. I think volumes and mesh data is going to be the very first thing that we support, and then we'll go from there. But we're also looking at we are currently working on Vectron and Hair support inside of Brigade as well as we develop all these different pieces in tandem.
Is there going to be some sort of a almost like a wall you hit? Like if you're trying to render from Brigade, is the speed of the hard drive actually going to be your wall? Yeah. So that's one of the reasons why I think Embergen is such a huge benefit to the ecosystem, because it's slower to load a VDB than it is to render it in Embergen on the GPU. So it's true. It's you can make those tests for yourself. You can see the Embergen rendering it takes 3 milliseconds to simulate, and then it takes a lot longer to not just load it from the VDB file, but also to pass it through CPU, then GPU memory. There are things Nvidia is working on, right, and there's things in DXR that load directly from the hard drive to, or an SSD to GPU memory. that will help. But even for render, right, render on the blockchain or the cloud service, being able to save the ability of having to send VDBs over inside an OrbX file to the render is a really big deal. Like my goal with Django effects is that we end up with if most simulations could just be done in Embergen, and they will render faster. They will obviously then be editable, live, which is great. And the goal with Embergen is to get to something that's like as close to what you could get out of a full production simulator, but all on the GPU. Houdini 18.5, they added basically their fast pyro solution, which is similar to Embergen, right? It does it on the GPU.
but I don't think it works, with massive sparse volumes, which Embergen is going to support in January, which is going to be a really big improvement. And Embergen is just crazy fast. I mean, that's the thing with the partnership is,
really is.
Brigade's really fast, Octane's faster offline, but Embergen is our solution for doing that for simulations. They're also working on LiquidGen for water, which is great. And I think we're also looking at filling in sort of the spectrum of what we could do with physics. Like there's a lot of great physics systems that are out there, including PhysX from Nvidia, but we want to get things like cloth and other things to also be simulated as well on the GPU, and that's kind of in progress. So I'll probably be able to share more about that in a month or two once we get further into that. But I think Embergen and Octane and Brigade together is a really powerful combination. We're going to have a major update, I think, for Octane and Embergen users around January. That's when Embergen's new version's coming out. And we do have, somebody was asking in the chat about where, how is that going with the DCC integration. Embergen, as of this month, finally has all of that code inside of a library that we can now integrate in Octane Core. We can then build a node system around that, and Ahmed is eager to do all the interface work inside of, for example, C4D to make that straightforward. So I'd say that first quarter next year is when we could start to see an Embergen DCC integration come together, and it'll probably, again, like everything else, will whatever we have ready in that first quarter, we'll put out there, and we might improve it further from there. But Embergen itself will support being able to load animated geometry inside of the Embergen simulation, which is really important because right now it's just static.
Right.
So with that, then the integration inside of the DCCs actually makes a lot of sense. So that's why I think January will be a big boost, and then the months that follow will probably be where you'll see releases that include Embergen in the DCC plugins.
What nodes are missing from Brigade right now?
Keep getting in before
Sorry.
I can ask the question.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
A lot, unfortunately. I mean, so for example, the we don't have OSL shaders inside of Brigade. So I think if you looked at Octane X, there was a PR2 version, PR1. Actually, no, a lot of people weren't on the beta, but there's a version where we just didn't have any of the 40 built-in texture shaders that Octane had. That's the state that Brigade's in right now. It doesn't have mixed materials that work with more than two, one level deep, for example. So those are the things that we need to continue to work on. On the other hand, I don't think it'll take, more than a few months to sort of get at least the built-in, shaders and noises inside of Brigade. And as we're doing that, we're also going to, keep looking at ways of improving those even further. Like the way that we do dirt, for example, in Brigade could be very different. I mean, it may look hopefully similar to Octane, but it might be a little bit different and hopefully a lot faster. So it's something where I would say that there's at least 40 texture nodes that are yet to be done. We have OSL support to be added. We have basic subsurface scattering. We don't have random walk yet in Brigade, but we will add that.
You have caustics?
We do have caustics. So I showed one example of that running in the last video, and it's specular caustics, which is pretty cool. And we have volume caustics as well. So it is. I mean, Brigade definitely has some bias tricks that Octane doesn't have, or doesn't necessarily promote. One of those is if you have a Sculptron light, the built-in light primitives that are in Octane and also in Brigade, you send those for volume, it is instantaneous. You get volumetric caustics. You also get instantaneous caustics with those lights. Mesh emitters, which is all that Octane had until Octane 2020, those are evaluated more slowly. They still work, but they are not the way that I would, if you're going to use Brigade for instantaneous speeds, build your lights as area lights or spotlights or sphere lights, the primitives that we now also support in Octane, versus doing a mesh emitter, and you'll get much faster and higher quality results out of that. So if you're going to do caustics, use those built-in lights in Brigade, and you'll have instantaneous, beautiful caustics from those. If you use mesh emitters, it'll be slower or less precise, but it'll still work.
Okay, my question. Jumping back to like the easy kernel switch between anime render, Octane, Brigade, Arnold. How easy will the switch be? Because in your video you showed just a simple click of a button jumping from Arnold to Octane, and you do notice that, like, say the liquid, for example, in the Arnold scene was not rendering as like a specular material or whatever, or like a liquid material. Are there going to be certain things that you need to set up when doing this? Like, for example, I'm putting an Arnold tag on this one because I know I'm going to be using that one specifically, like Arnold, or is it it's just a simple click?
So the goal is that it's a simple click. and you can extend that. I mean, there are things that are going to be different. Even in Brigade, it's like it's meant to be a simple click. The Arnold specular conversion from Octane is just it's broken. Like that's why that thing wasn't looking the same.
Yeah.
The water wasn't the same. And the interesting thing is the reason why is that we're actually using USD's built-in preview material. So Arnold's being hooked into Octane through the Hydra Pixar USD interface, and Arnold's support for that is basically in progress, as is our ability to sort of export to the standard USD material system. What we're doing with Arnold, though, is we're going to support at a much higher level the ability to take all of the Octane nodes and convert them into Arnold standard surface nodes, which will be really precisely matched to Octane. Octane itself will consume that. Other renderers like Arnold can consume it. And the idea is that when Octane and Arnold are basically able to use those things really nicely, then other renderers can adopt that, even through Hydra. There always are going to be things that are a little different, but I would say that out of all the production renderers out there, we're pretty sure that the Arnold Octane, switching is going to be pretty automatic, but it'll take a while. Like that's work that we're just getting started, and we're doing it in stages again. But the idea is that it'll be fully, automatic for most types of scenes. But to your point, you're going to have things you can add for a specific render. We'll have Octane specific tags, Arnold specific tags, anime render specific tags. Why not? Like that's something that that we could support, so that if you're doing material variants, which is a thing, for example, that USD supports, there are things that we want artists to be able to to tune for a specific renderer. On the other hand, we also want it so that if you're buying something off of TurboSquid that's a Orbex or C4D file or something like that, could just load in multiple renderers. Yeah. And that's the goal. So it's only for very expert level advanced settings that you might need to go into a specific render and do different things. But we'll see. I mean, as we add more renderers, we'll figure it out. I mean, our goal, certainly with the internal ones between Brigade, Anime, and Octane, is that pretty much it's going to be a lot like switching between direct lighting and path tracing. Right. There are some things that change because the subsurface scattering and things like that are different between those kernels, but it's ultimately the same scene. As far as speed goes, the one of the things that probably the video made look easier than it was is that actually had Arnold already running. So you can start up multiple renders at the same time and then synchronize them, and the synchronization happens instantaneously. You can even render them at the same time and even composite them. But the load up time for Arnold is pretty small. I mean, it's about like if you were to stop the render in C4D and Octane for C4D and load it again, it's about that same speed for for doing that with Arnold or other renderers and Brigade as well. So it'll be a few seconds to fully close one render down and boot up another one, but you can also render them at the same time, even have Octane on one GPU, Brigade on another. All that stuff is cool. Viable. Super cool.
So the example that you showed with Arnold, is that GPU only on Arnold, or is it able to use the CPU as well?
So to the point about tags, when we have the multi-render system, depending on the renders that we support, there's a bunch of extra properties you can set for a specific GPU or multi-render system. In the case of anime render, you can set things like the line settings. It's like a kernel setting. In Arnold, you can switch between CPU and GPU, and it works. You can actually use both, which is pretty cool. So yeah, both CPU, GPU work. It's just a one flag setting. And we're going to add more and more of those. I mean, rather than kind of making so you can take any render in the world and add it as a Hydra render delegate, we kind of want to do what we've done with the third-party plugins for Octane, where yes, some third parties like Ahmed have developed these things, but we do a lot of work with that partner to make it work nicely. And we're going to do that with the Arnold guys as well. It'll be all the Arnold settings will be there, and GPU and CPU both work. And you can even load up both of those in tandem with multi-render and link those together, which is pretty interesting.
Wow.
Rendering Octane on all your GPUs and then Arnold on your CPU. Yeah. Your computer's gonna get hot.
Yeah.
Yeah. One other cool factor that we can turn on is, we are working on headless rendering with Octane. The cool part is headless rendering will work with all those multiple renderers as well. So you could be able to do headless rendering with Brigade, with Arnold, with anime render. The headless part actually just decouples the full core of Octane from the DCC tool, and that's in progress too. We have it already kind of working nicely with Blender, but it'll be coming to all the DCC plugins, and that'll work with multi-render, which is pretty nice.
And put all your render machines in the basement.
Right.
Have a nice, cool office.
Yeah.
Let's talk about anime render a little bit more. I think people want to probably find out a little bit more about it. Tell us in general, for people who haven't heard of it, what's it about?
So the anime renderer came out of a lot of requests that users had when we first introduced cell shading as a material, or toon rendering in Octane. You know, one of the big missing pieces that Octane itself couldn't really fix was having really nice, like, drawn lines or edges around surfaces. Like, that's not something that you could just do in shaders. You have to do a whole separate pass for that. So the anime renderer initially came out of that work. We have a dedicated developer on that. It's like a, and it was initially meant to be another render kernel or mode in Octane, and it just, again, one of the things we did with the anime renderer, the reason why it's so fast, as you're showing in that video, is it is just like Brigade. It's built with RTX by default, so it's all using ray tracing hardware. We could probably port it backwards, but right now it's running on RTX cards, and it's really fast. But it does primarily do edge rendering. You can also then take those edges and overlay those on top of Octane, or you could just use the equivalent of what we have in Octane's cell shading system right within the anime renderer. And that's, you know, the edge rendering is such an important piece that, you know, there's no way to really do cell shaded 3D animation without that. And having a dedicated renderer for that purpose ended up just making the most sense, just like Brigade being its own dedicated renderer made the most sense versus trying to completely bake those into Octane itself. We handle the geometry differently. It's you know, behind the scenes, it isn't that much different from switching kernels, but it does allow you to then take you know, things that are just very difficult to do in Octane with line rendering and just get that right out of the box, and then even combine those together, which is pretty cool. So Cryptomat and Octane will also allow you to then composite live certain things that are done in one render and another. But yeah, the anime renderer is, as you guys are seeing, it is real time. It's a little bit like some of the early Brigade tests that were 4K 60. It's kind of that speed. It's really, really fast, even on a single GPU.
That's cool.
Now, World Creator, that's something we haven't talked about yet.
Yes.
Yes, that's super exciting. So World Creator is our second third-party tool that we've sort of added to our subscription offerings. And, you know, for those that may not be familiar, World Creator is an amazing standalone tool that allows you to build procedural terrains and skies and clouds. It's used, you know, by artists like Aaron Westwood to just do amazing scenes, and it's all GPU based. So our, you know, the partnerships that we're sort of choosing to include with these other tools that we're bringing into the you know, subscription offerings, things like Embergen, World Creator, those things are all running on the GPU. And the standalone version of World Creator, just like the standalone version of Embergen, is how we're beginning that process. So you'll, you know, I think in the coming week, we're putting out the free version of World Creator standalone, World Creator 2. Sweet. And around early next month, we'll hopefully have World Creator 3 available on the store. And the idea with all these extra you know, tools is that you can get them for a significant discount if you already are an Octane subscriber, and there'll be a free version with limited features that you can get no matter what. So if you're basically on an Octane Studio sub for less than $20 a month, you'll have parts of Embergen and you know, and World Creator that'll work at least for playback inside of those tools. And then the idea is you can then upgrade, you know, it'll probably be in the same price range as an extra render node, which is like, you know, 10 euros a month, I think, on the shop page. You'll be able to add that to your sub. And I think that's how we're looking at it. We'll probably also do a suite of things where you can get all these different tools together for discount price. We're exploring that. And every, you know, every partnership sort of has their own, you know, things they want to sort of attach to that. But, you know, we're all in this together. Like, there's sort of an alliance of different 3D tools and partners that we have around what we're doing to try to bring these together. And in the case of World Creator, it was sort of the World Creator guy's proposal to take what's inside of World Creator and to build a set of nodes that allow you to use World Creator functionality directly inside of the DCC plugins, kind of like what we're doing with Embergen as well. And so having that will be really nice. And of course, we you know, I think node-based you know, authoring is something that we can expose in all the various tools. Most tools have a, you know, node system. In C40, of course, we have Ahmed's node editor, which is pretty advanced. We're also looking, of course, at supporting the C40 one as well, where it makes sense. But yeah, that's how we see those coming. And there'll be other tools as well. We're actively looking at other partners that can fill in some of the DCC blind spots, so to speak, where there isn't, you know, like one plugin that works in all the DCCs that can do this stuff. I mean, the great thing about Embergen going into Octane Core is that 20-something DCCs can now use Embergen. You don't have to, you know, if you're a developer, you don't have to build 20 different plugins. You just piggyback on ours to provide that and get great integration with Octane Brigade and even other renderers as well.
And Aaron's short film that he's working on with World Creator, it's coming soon. That looks incredible, those shots.
It does.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Let's see here. Real quick, before we hit this next section here, I did want to ask you about the AR stuff because, you know, every time you do one of these, it looks like there's a little bit more a little bit more progress in that area. So how's the AR stuff going?
It's going great. I mean, the GTC videos that we put out were probably the first time that we really showed how animations would look inside of the Octane or Brigade actually on the iPhone. So I should back up a little bit and talk about our strategy just on iPhone and iPad in general. We have essentially two. I've been showing for most of this year that we have Octane running on an iPhone, and it's actually pretty fast. It's probably about 20 OctaneBench on the iPhone 12 and the iPad Air 4. And we could do full production rendering on those devices. But with Brigade, which again, we're introducing Brigade to do real-time stuff. And Brigade, when you switch from Octane to Brigade, for example, in Unreal or within Unity, Brigade will actually be able to render those scenes, with game engine speed and Octane quality in those engines. So that's something that is going to be useful for, I think, people releasing games that want to leverage that kind of quality, even for interactive experiences. But I think where we're going with Octane on iPhone in particular is we want to have people be able to load, let's say, an OrbX file, like what you're showing here. And that is literally Octane Standalone running on the iPhone. All the interface, everything just works. But the more interesting piece is, well, what about Brigade? So Brigade, again, it leverages ray tracing hardware heavily, but it also is faster than Octane for reflections and things like that. So a hybrid approach where we can kind of bake in some of the GI, some of the irradiance, which we do support. It's not something we're actively needing to do, I think, on the desktop, but on an iPhone, having that steps of pre-computing some of the lighting and then using Brigade to then render that live in AR is looking really good. And so we showed some of that a little bit earlier in April. And then in October, we showed how that works with animated scenes, which is pretty cool. So these scenes can be animated on an iPhone. And yeah, that's basically showing, I think, the irradiance cache in Brigade running on an iPad with just the reflections, the glossy reflections being ray traced. The stuff that we're showing sort of subsequent to that, because that was about a year and a half back, is full on like explosions and destructing geometry, also in the right out of Octane, right out of the OrbX file, and it looks beautiful in ARKit with with basically Brigade running. And that's where we think that there's going to be a lot of users that might sort of touch Octane or Brigade for the first time, just on their phones or iPads, just creating scenes, right, that maybe they're loaded from, the Kit Bash scenes or Turbo Squid or any of these, or we can provide through Render, right? We want to provide a marketplace for people to sell their own, or back scenes or their own assets, and being able to then composite that or do that live on the iPhone is really cool. There's a huge number of viral videos that are done inside of Octane on the desktop where people take video, they do the camera tracking, and then they sort of do compositing with that inside of Octane on the desktop. But if you could do that on the phone itself and have that run live and make it really easy, I think that's going to be pretty interesting. And that also will get a lot of people, I think, into 3D that might not be quite as accustomed to that. That's kind of how we see the iPhone client working. And then when you get to iPad, well, we can have a full version of Octane Standalone with a keyboard and trackpad actually up and running if you want to use it as you would on the desktop. But that's also where we see an iPad, OctaneX app with things like Embergen integrated, or World Creator, or Sculptron, which we haven't even talked about, kind of giving you even more tools to create. So that video we're seeing here is showing, more dynamic scenes running on the iPhone, also just rendering live, which is really cool. And I think the one after that, the ones after that are even better. There's motion blur, which we can now support in live rendering. And there's one scene, I think, with a helicopter in a car, which we'll get to in a little bit, showing. Those were really cool. And those ones we didn't show before. Those were kind of internal tests that we were doing. But I think that when you're talking about doing even virtual production, which is another area that I think this could be useful for, you could bring in your scenes onto an iPad and you can just see how they render, on set. And whether or not you're rendering it locally or or remotely with headless rendering, or just doing it on the cloud, all those options will be available to you from an iPhone or an iPad. And this particular one is awesome. This is an artist in Qatar that just did this in Octane for Houdini. And I showed all those videos because I'm like, well, what we want is, let's bring this so that you can do it on device. There's an OrbX file that was done by VLR in 3D Studio Max. And there it is running live on the iPhone. And it was still pretty good.
Wow.
And so this is basically Brigade mode without any, you don't miss the GI so much, but it's doing all the reflections and everything else live. And you can even do scene destruction live. So and this is on an iPhone 11. The iPhone 12 is going to be even more, robust and powerful. It's super cool and super fun. So I think that the number, and there's hundreds of millions of users that have iPhones that can now run Octane and Brigade on there. So that market, I think, is pretty exciting. And we have OctaneX, so we'll always have the ability to do full rendering on these devices locally if the hardware keeps getting better and better.
And the when Apple comes out with their AR glasses.
Yeah, sign me up. I mean, I'll be first in line to get one of those. I mean, I don't have any specific insight into how that hardware will come out, but you hear the rumors and you know that there's a lot of people working on AR, and you see all of the investment inside of ARKit on the iPhone. And you can totally see where that's going, because my assumption is that it's going to end up working like like the watch initially did, where you pair the glasses that are lightweight with your phone, and that just works, because I think the phones are already getting powerful enough to do the things that you were just showing. Those last two videos were rendering live, 100% live on the phone. So being able to have AR glasses that are fed by the phone wirelessly, I don't know, 60 gigahertz or something like that can do that, it's going to give you a pretty great experience, and it's definitely going to be a thing. I mean, I think when Apple and Facebook put out glasses that are in that form factor that are really lightweight like sunglasses, it's going to be tens of millions of units. VR has never really seemed to have gotten into that. Even the Quest, which is very popular, just people don't wear it all the time, and that's because the glasses are heavy. The glasses need to be so lightweight. They really do for this to take off. But I think Apple and Facebook and others might be able to pull it off.
They have to not look goofy. Like, you don't want to walk down the street with your AR glasses looking like a goofball. That's when it will become mainstream, when it's nice.
Like Google Glass.
Yeah. We
We
haven't talked about Sculptron much yet.
Yes. So Sculptron is another, it's like one of those 20% projects inside of Otoy that ended up getting a little more traction as we invested more time in it. It came out of a need that we saw early on. There really isn't a lot of great tools that, one, provide GPU sculpting and modeling, and two, there's not a lot of sculpting tools even that allow you to do that temporally. So if you wanted to, let's say, sculpt over time, or take a bunch of different totally uncorrelated OBJs and kind of combine those together and then do sculpting on top of that, or animation work, we felt that was missing. So we just developed a tool that it's currently packaged with your Octane subs. If you're not an Octane subscriber, we'll probably provide Sculptron as a $10 a month subscription, so you don't have to get an Octane sub to use it. But it's designed to provide a workflow that is missing in a lot of DCC tools. It's a niche tool, but it's very fast. And I think as we have built that piece of it out further and further, we're seeing, well, we can do a lot more. Like, we can give you, good modeling tools. We can do deformations and things like that that are really, really, really fast, that are actually kind of, not as easy to do in things like Blender or in Maya. So I think that we want to keep working on that. But I think initially Sculptron, just by having really good GPU sculpting tools that can be, that can animate things, is goal number one. Goal number two is people don't know how to create Vectron easily, right? That's something like this, like a black box in C40 and others. It's like a bunch of formulas you can stick together. But the idea with Sculptron was we eventually just hook up Vectron into that, so that you can go into solo mode for a Vectron object and sculpt and animate that with Vectron brushes and all of that. And we can then control, at least in the Sculptron window, how that works. That's something that is another sort of short-term goal with Sculptron itself. And then also just taking those pieces and throwing those into standalone or Octane Standalone, for example, on an iPad. So you can do a little more than what Octane Standalone can currently do, which is not very, it doesn't give you any modeling capabilities or much less sculpting or temporal sculpting capabilities. That's where we see Sculptron heading, and we'll just keep adding to that as we keep working on it. But it is unique. It's like with Embergen and with Octane itself, like there's a whole, part of the pipeline chains that are out there that have not been really migrated over to the GPU yet. And so sculpting was one of those where we felt, here's an area that we could do something interesting in.
Go ahead.
Did I see something in your talk about adding dynamics to Octane?
Yes. Yep. So as we were looking at adding support for Embergen, for example, which is essentially going to be a set of nodes that deal purely with simulation, that integrate with the scene graph, we wanted to have physics support. And what's interesting is, in this case, we're just looking at PhysX and Bullet, which are two open source, relatively open source physics libraries. PhysX is created by Nvidia. It has GPU support. It's used by Unreal and Unity. I think Unreal just switched to a different physics engine. But just like with Multirender, we have multi-physics. So we have basic nodes that support soft body dynamics, things like that. And the idea is that inside of the core of Octane, you have those things. So you can set those up, and you can then run a physics simulation in Brigade or AR. And again, the goal is we can drop in different physics simulation backends to that, just like we do with rendering. And so we've currently got it working with Bullet and with PhysX, which are the two most commonly used, but we can also look at Unreal's physics system which is called Chaos, I think, and others as well. But we want to have that specifically so that if you're in AR and you want to have objects that are live, that bounce around, for example, the scene itself can have that in there. And also, if you're going to feed that even into things that coexist with things like Embergen and others, that data can be handled by the core of the scene graph in Octane itself. And it also is something we want to extend again to things like cloth and I think with Embergen, when they have liquid gen, right, we'll have liquid support in there. So it makes sense to just extend that further. What's interesting is that both Apple and Nvidia don't often work together that closely, but they both are betting on USD for AR and for Omniverse, and Omniverse is Nvidia's sort of pipeline stack where you can send data to a single server and it uses USD. So both Apple and Nvidia together added all these extensions to USD, which do support essentially the same thing we're doing, right? Just basically define rigid body constraints, soft dynamics, all of that, so that you can have in ARKit, physics that are defined inside of the USD file. And that just feels like it's going to converge really nicely. Like what we were building for PhysX and Bullet was so close to that we're probably just going to adopt or merge that with whatever the USD physics spec is. And that also goes to one other feature, which is kind of probably should get a little bit of attention, which is USD support inside of Octane is in progress. So instead of exporting an OrbX with a LeanBic or FBX, we're just going to use USD for the most part. And USD itself is is getting worked on. They're adding some really cool features in there, like physics and the like. And we see that as being pretty important for improving the interchange between different DCCs, improving the size of OrbX files. Like LeanBic is not great. That's what we default to when we're exporting out of C40. And also USD importing will just work in the core of Octane and standalone in all these different things. So that I think is a really important pipeline consideration for us going forward as well.
Cool.
So let's talk about future roadmaps a little bit. I know it's kind of like a mixed blessing, right? Because you announce all the things you're going to do, and then everybody's like, "I want it now! I want it now!" Yeah. And when is it coming? But it's really great that you do that. I think because we can really see, what's coming up in the pipeline, what to look forward to. It's almost like I don't get the same feeling when I watch an Apple keynote that I used to do like back in 2005. But I do kind of get that feeling whenever I watch your GTC videos about what to look forward to. I've got a huge list here, and some of this stuff I have no idea what it is. And so I think that'll be my question on some of these. Now some of them make sense, like geo-clipping. I saw geo-clipping.
Ooh, I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, so everything that we actually have a video of that we can do a screen recording is actually probably one release away after 2020.2. So geo-clipping is one of those. And yeah, people have wanted that for a while. I mean, it's in other renders, but I think that, our goal again is like every time we've done something in Octane, like random walk, it's been fast, it's efficient, it's high quality. And I think geo-clipping is going to be awesome. It had to wait until we had nested dielectrics done, which was something that's in 2020.2. that allows you to do proper rendering between different mediums. So liquid and glass and air, for example, that didn't always work well inside of Octane prior to that. Arnold, I think the latest Arnold release also added nested dielectrics about a week ago. With that work done, geo-clipping then made a lot of sense because we already have a lot of information about the geometry in the scene. So you should be able to use geo-clipping not just with meshes, but maybe also with Vectron, which is going to be super cool. So you'll have procedural clipping support, which is nice. The other screenshot we did was of AI Light, which is going to be twice as fast. So you'll have or half as much noise for the same rendering time, and that'll also work. That'll improve the shading speed as well. And then some of the further things that are a little further out. For example, like PPM kernel, which is a whole separate kernel that we're creating just to handle caustics. That is designed to provide really fast caustics at the quality that PMC does, but at the speed that you get with, frankly, shooting like a gobo, right, which is how a lot of people fake caustics in Octane and even other renders. It's meant to be as fast as that, but with this, with the quality that you get from PMC. So
it's a hybrid
that
kernel.
Work is hybrid kernel, and it's been done in I think Corona has something like that. I mean, it's out there, but I think we're going to do it the Octane way and make sure it's spectral and it works great. I don't know where that fits into in the very near term roadmap. It's probably sort of a mid-year kind of thing, but the stuff that is already that was in our 2022 release. This is what we're working on next. Custom AOVs, massive improvements to stability, memory management out of core. Those things are really pretty far along. Geo clipping, better AI light support. fully complete working open color IO system all the way to the viewport. Like that's kind of 2/3 of the way done in 2020.2, 1/3 of the way done in 2020.1. I think by the end of this year, the first release of following 2020.2 should have full open color IO, working ASA support. There's a lot of good stuff, but there's also a list of things, frankly, that we get mostly from the Mograph Slack, where we ask, you guys, like 530 Octane artists, like maybe 500 because 30 of us are, I think, in that Slack. But what do you guys want in what order, and let's do it in that way. Every 4 months we have a pretty major release. Like it used to be 2 years between 3 and 4. And now it's like, it's like 3 to 6 months, depending on how much we want to squeeze in there. So a lot of things that people are asking for, like we want to make sure that if you have a light in a volume and you make the light invisible, it doesn't mess up the volume rendering. That is now like top priority because, enough people ask us for that. So that'll probably be in there in the next few months. I think we're going to get that fix in place. But there's a lot of things. So there's many sort of the more forward-looking features involve things like the PPM kernel and things like that. But a lot of the big things we have on that roadmap, a good chunk of them are already out in 2020.2. Even more will be out by the end of the year with the release after that, as we work on getting that to a stable release, maybe around March or April. And I think some of the biggest pieces are kind of around Octane, like Brigade and Multirender and the Animate Render and Embergen and even the World Creator and other pieces, which is exciting because that means we can do those in parallel. I mean, their Embergen work, I think the Django effects is doing such great work. I mean, we don't need to wait on them. They don't need to wait on us to really kind of do their great work, and we can then sort of integrate things in parallel. But one thing we did learn from Octane 3, which was not our greatest release, like I'm sure people remember that kind of taking a long time to get all those things done, is we want to make sure we have releases that are focused on they're faster and also focus on features that users really want. And any of the fancier, crazier things, we sort of do those around the core, so we don't slow down some of the fundamental things that people may want. And that's why I think we've had a really good release cycle the last 2 years. I think since Octane 4, things have got better and better. And stability is absolutely number one. Nvidia driver support helps a lot, but we're going to do our part as well. To do multi-process rendering is also on the roadmap. Didn't make it into 2020.2, but it'll be probably out there by second quarter of next year, I think. And even then, just working with NVIDIA and also just working on improving out of core in general will reduce stability issues significantly on top of all the work we've done this year, which I think has paid off.
And you got curvature maps. Explain curvature curvature nodes. So
curvature nodes allow you to basically ray trace the curvature of a point. So if you're doing things like the dirt node, for example, is a little bit like that. It's basically ambient occlusion that gives you ambient occlusion as a texture. So curvature will basically shoot rays around, it gives you like rounded edges as a shader. So rounded edges right now is just sort of this material property that you apply globally to an object, but curvature node would give you the ability to get the roundedness of an edge and then filter that into the normal map or the color channels. And it's definitely been a pretty high request, and it'll allow you to essentially just replicate what you can do with rounded edges inside of the shader system. And at that point, you may not need a rounded edges, node or whatever in there. You'll be able to do that inside of the shaders and apply the equivalent of a rounded edges mask, with these different, properties, the way you do dirt shaders inside of any, texture input in the node system.
And random color texture as well.
Yeah, these are things that have come up from user requests where there have been limitations with being able to assign different random colors to instances and things like that. There's all of that is being worked on. I think I was looking at the chat here. Somebody was asking about the chaos texture system. I think which allows you to basically do seamless tiling. That is, to be honest, a lot of the things going in 2020.2 are OSL shaders that have been out in the forums in different places, but we're just taking those and we're baking those into the core because there's just too much. It's too hard for artists. I mean, we just learned this 3 years after adding OSL. It's too hard for artists to go and ask them to go and get an OSL or write an OSL.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So, I know that. Something is the great hope. You didn't know, you add OSL. You can do anything in OSL. Therefore, anything is done. It doesn't work that way. So even on LiveDB, we have all these utility nodes for, ray type switching and color channel merging. Like in 2020.2 XB5 that just came out, all of those are inside the core of Octane now because you'll never have to go to LiveDB or search for those again. And chaos texture is one of those things that's going to be in there. So we're just going to keep adding every interesting OSL texture into the core. You just don't have to go look for it. And that will sort of limit OSL, I think, to things that are truly sort of more advanced or custom. And even then, if somebody does something great that users want to have inside of the core, it's no big deal for us to add that in subsequent releases. And that's just a lesson learned from years of having OSL there and not having, I mean, people like, oh, there's no, channel splitting in Octane. I'm like, well, no, I mean, OSL could do all this. And it's just too hard.
Right.
It's just too hard. And you guys are right. You guys were some of the first to flag that to us. Like, well, even on LiveDB, it's too hard to go and grab that in. Just put it in the core. So we're doing that with everything we can. And that's well underway with 2020.2. More of that is going to go into 20.3 or whatever the release after this will be as we keep going.
Brodeur, speak of the devil. He's in the chat here. You have a really cool looking render from David Brodeur, and it's talking about spectral fabric.
Yes. So there's actually a lot of things in the roadmap relating to material and BRDF properties that some of those didn't quite make it into 2020.2, but they'll make it in hopefully the release after. And that includes a better fabric BRDF. So we introduced, better hair material. We introduced random mark for skin shading. Fabric is really pretty good in Octane. That render from him, by the way, is just using Octane 20.1 or 2019 even. But one thing we could do is we can make that quality easier to achieve, faster with less noise, and possibly even more realistic. So we have a dedicated fabric BRDF that we are working on. And we're also working on another couple of critical pieces that have come up. For example, GGX inside of Octane is currently not energy conserving. There's also a, the tail sort of the reflections in the GGX BRDF in Octane, isn't supported and is in things like V-Ray, for example. So we're adding those in there. And the reason why some of those take time is that Octane just isn't exactly like other renders. We're just not like V-Ray or even Redshift. There are different things that go into the quality and the way it's architected. But when we do add those, it usually gets done in a way that's really pleasing to artists and users. So I think the work on the Fabric BRDF and the GGX improvements will be great. And more importantly, the other thing is we want to make Octane faster with each release, not slower. So the way GPU rendering works, the more features you add, the slower that GPU renderer goes. So that's one of the reasons why Octane 1 was like really, really fast. I mean, I think we've more than caught up to that speed, but it's been like dark magic getting a whole bunch of features since Octane 4 to now have higher OctaneBench, at least on Turing and later cards, than V4 would ever be able to achieve with a lot less features. And it's been super challenging on AMD and on OctaneX, by the way, to get the same results. But AMD, I think, has good hardware, and Metal at least has given us what we need, and hopefully Vulkan will also unlock AMD and Intel and others at some point.
Are you, just real quick, this just popped in my head. Are you able to use Octane X and like on a Mac and a PC version at the same time currently?
Not currently,
Okay.
and there's a reason for that, because the way that we developed Octane X, and it's actually a version ahead of 2020.2 in terms of its architecture. In memory, the geometry is completely different. However, after 2020.2, we're going to basically do a revamp for both Octane X and Octane on render on CUDA, and they should then, that version after 2020.2 should be able to then allow you to mix those together over network rendering and the like. They'll be much more in sync. So by the time that we get, I'd say, to April, we should have render nodes that work on interchangeably between the two of those.
Cool.
But yeah, that's definitely going to happen, and that's pretty exciting as well.
And you got post-processing updates coming as well. Things like you've got things like the AI style transfer node, where you have the Deep Dream AI deal, like merging with the geometry. That's pretty trippy looking.
Yeah. So adding a compositor system inside of 2020.2 was like the first step to many cool things we could be adding as both modules and
about that.
other things. So the Deep Dream piece is just a library, but we also, by the way, I want to add OpenFX shaders to the compositor system, so you could take, for example, Need Video and just drop that into the core and run OpenFX plugins like Need Video right in there. There's no reason not to expose that, right? Things like that, and also style transfer is another one that could be run as a post effect. And now that we have, even in 2020.2, even though it's sort of preliminary, we have essentially Photoshop layers and multiple inputs into the final imager node or the compositing pass, right, that you can then use. Like, all those things become possible, and we can start adding plugins, not just for multi-render, not just for multi-physics, but also for the post system as well. And I find that super exciting. And if you don't have to go into After Effects or Photoshop to finish your render, that'll work. OSL shaders, I think, after 2022 is done, should also work in the compositor, so you can do things like blurring and filtering and all those things. People sometimes ask, is it possible to write a blur filter in OSL? It is. There are some of those in the form, so you could do that, and all those things will essentially be doable in the post-processing system, and it'll still be spectral, at least when it's coming from Octane. We're keeping it in XYZ, 4-channel color space up until the very end. so that if it is coming out of the Octane renderer, it'll still have that spectral quality all the way until the last piece. And that I think is also going to make the post up look really nice.
Multi-region rendering, depth of field, on-off toggle, the lens effects, the physically based lens effects, chromatic aberration, lens flares.
Ooh, lens flares.
And
nice.
what I want to say, I think Ariev told me that this is something that he had highly requested, is the optical zoom motion blur.
Yes. So those are all in progress. I don't know if they're going to make it in this year, unfortunately, because they're just, again, all the things that we've sort of done ahead of those came first. But the chromatic aberration, I'll start with that. There's two ways of doing it. One is we can kind of do it fast and dirty, which is I think where we'll start. So you can just get something that looks pretty good right out of the universal camera. And then there's the one where we do it like totally unbiased and there's no trickery, no speed ups, no speed ups, but it also is super accurate. That is something we've already enabled and it's just kind of slow. So we're working on sort of optimizing both of those, and then we'll connect those into the universal camera, which I think is also a great fertile area where we can do a lot of really cool stuff. The universal camera itself can already pretty much replicate almost all the other cameras. And because it's really programmable, we can do a lot of those camera lens effects in there. And the idea is that you can kind of plug in those lens effects into the universal camera system and have sliders that control the quality versus the speed of the results. In Brigade, we did test chromatic aberration. One of the slides or videos showed that early result. So it's working in real time. It's not like super precise, but it does give you, pretty close to accurate chromatic aberration. And all the post-processing things that we're looking at for lens effects and all of that will come into the Compositor pass system once we're done with all the imager revamp. Like I think, from users' perspective, I think everyone wants to have a really robust production-ready AOV system in Octane as soon as possible. And once that's in place, then that will probably be in a release before the end of this year. And then we'll add the fancier, lens flare effects and all those pieces on top of that. But yeah, those are all in progress.
Yeah, you can do those snap zooms and get that nice looking motion blur in there. So I don't know if there's anything else in the future roadmap to go over. I'd love to talk about if there's any holodeck updates. Any new news on that front? I love to pick your brain on that whenever you're on.
Yeah, so the team at Lightfield Lab, which has been our they're our long-term partners, like we're developing the software stack and the pipeline stack so that their displays can kind of ship to they're people that want them, right? And it's going to be initially location-based entertainment and things like that are going to be the focus of this stuff. But when you look at where, like Mandalorian, right, which is done with Unreal on LED screens, I mean, the future of that entire pipeline is holographic displays. Of course, it's going to be great for amusement parks, but it also is going to be amazing for productions where you could just bring in a camera, have an entire room full of these panels, probably have, you could, for example, still use Unreal Engine, but with Brigade or maybe Octane rendering it. But our work with Brigade is to actually use that as a starting point for real-time functionality on those displays. It's running on, because those things are 32K by 32K powered by 16 GPUs. When we first tested, it was still running about 15 frames a second across those GPUs, and that was with RTX. With the with Turing. So with Ampere, we're probably going to get to 30 frames a second live rendering with Brigade on a holographic display panel that is pretty large, and it's the ones that Lightfield Labs are building. It's so different than anything that's out there that you're seeing. Like the Looking Glass is nothing like that. Those Looking Glass displays, even the Sony one, which I think is super cool. I don't know if you guys saw the Sony one where you has eye tracking, sort of lenticular. They're still kind of just very high resolution lenticular displays. They don't give you an object that is floating in front of the display that looks real with convergence and all that stuff. That's what the holographic displays from Lightfield Labs do, and it's so ambitious. I mean, it's also a longer term goal before this becomes consumer ready. But I do think, like anything else, you're going to see this in larger venues, theme parks, things like that, and then probably production shoots. And then the more they build, the cheaper it becomes, and we just want to be ready for that future. So ray tracing hardware, all the work we're doing with Brigade, all that stuff is going to be fundamental to that. But they are done now with, I think, their first production-ready tile. I mean, I think it's like a 18-inch by 18-inch one. So we're going to be testing that in the coming months. Obviously, with COVID and everything, we can't really easily schedule teams to come in and work together. But yeah, that's the latest on that. And I think next year, hopefully, you'll see some live demonstrations of those panels running, Octane or Brigade content on there. Either way, it's going to be pretty great to see that get to that step.
Do you think that is that going to show up well? Like you're talking about virtual production, is a camera going to be able to see it the same way that the human eye does?
Well, yes, because you can basically take a camera and like zoom in, and just like you get depth of field in the real world by changing the your camera lens, you'll be able to get depth of field on those actual holographic displays. It's crazy. It's basically the perfect green screen. It is the holodeck. I mean, if you went into the holodeck and you were to to try to get depth of field effects from objects there, that's what this gives you. It's so cool. Like I've taken a ground glass, a magnifying glass, and put it through onto the surface of the display, and it works just like you would in real life. You can do a telephoto lens and get 50x zoom off the holographic displays. There's that many rays of light being shot through it that it just is basically a window into whatever's behind that window is real. There's as many rays of light coming through that as there are out of that display, more or less. So that's why it works the way it does. It's pretty amazing.
One of these days, we're gonna show up at your headquarters, and you're gonna open that door, and there's gonna be the holodeck.
Yeah.
Hey guys, check this out.
I've asked them, I've asked them for a panel as soon as it's ready to have here, so we can develop and test on it. But it's for sure it's the future. I mean, I think you're going to see two types of maybe cooperative efforts around volumetric rendering, and one is going to be, of course, the glasses, AR glasses in particular, that are lightweight when you're outside. I think will work great. But I also feel like holographic display panels everywhere are going to be amazing, even just for what we're doing here, where we're doing teleconferencing, right? I mean, if you can have that experience where everyone's it looks like you're all there in front of a table. Yeah. I think that makes remoting so much more interesting, and learning and everything. I mean, to be honest, I think both those things, I mean, the decade of AR and holographic displays are coming now, the 2020s. So by the time that we're 10 years out from here, I think those will be commodities, really. I mean, we'll probably be on third gen of each one. And the display panels for the holographic display companies like Life Labs, I mean, they're working on touch, which is pretty exciting, through ultra haptics. So, it's going to be cool. It's going to be really cool.
And when it's the size of a VR, so what do they call it? A volume? They call it a volume? The stages for virtual production, don't they call it a volume? I think.
Yeah, I mean, the volume. Exactly. I mean,
when you have it that big.
Those are baby holodecks, and we do a lot of virtual. Well, we do a lot of scanning, right, with LightStage. That's been sort of our pipeline in there. We also do body scanning. We do other things. So the idea is that at some point we could do, we'd want to offer as a service. I mean, certainly if it's it's not one of Otoy's most publicly facing things, right? LightStage is kind of more for high end, movies and VFX work. But I think that being able to sort of help Lightfield Lab, as a service, provide these kinds of things where you can go into a virtual stage ahead of this thing becoming such a commodity that it's available everywhere and doing shoots is really interesting. And that is, there's just a cost difference between what's going to be available at the end of this year as holographic display panels and the LEDs that Favreau and others were using for Mandalorian, which are expensive. I don't know if there's enough of them to even build a second one of the stages, from what I've heard. But again, that's where things are heading, and it'll become cheaper and more usable by the masses, I think, year to year.
Last thing that I have on my list, and get your questions ready. If you got questions, go ahead and send them right now. The open metaverse. I'm kind of curious about what that is.
So for me, I feel like the success of all the major tech companies, that are the big ones, right? Facebook or Google or even an Apple, have come from the fact that we started off with an open web browser, right? Where, there wasn't an app store, there wasn't this lock-in, and, Facebook started off as a browser-based app. Google, the same thing, right? Apple had Safari on the iPhone. They didn't have an app store. Steve Jobs' first thing was like, go get your apps from web pages. And I think that's an amazing system. And that's why, one of the advisors to the company, Brandon Ike, was the guy that created JavaScript, built Firefox, right? That helped unlock the lock-in from IE. So I'm sort of a little bit in the Tim Sweeney, the guy that created Unreal, his camp of like, well, we want to have open standards and open systems so that when you do have an AR universe, artists, creators, people can just publish things and it's not locked behind a specific vendor. So from Otoy's perspective, I mean, we're not a huge company. There's only so many things we can do, but we can help promote open standards. So that's one of the reasons why we took what we had with Orbex, and we're also supporting things like GLTF and USD, and just trying to get those to work well enough so that we can even just export to those, and those can become, mini substandards that we can sort of promote. And I do think that there is a whole, there's going to be a fight over how volumetric objects work in AR. Like once you get even into phone-based AR, like what happens if you want to have something work both in AR Core on Google and AR Kit on the iPhone? From a browser, there are standards like OpenXR and all those things, but I do feel like there needs to be something that's more like the web. And part of our vision for that is, well, maybe render can help with that, because if we support multiple different renders, any tool can be created on there, and you have a blockchain-based system describing permissions for how objects are used, describing ways how things can be monetized. That's kind of like a template that I'd see for how I'd want an open metaverse to work. So take, for example, the NFTs, which is a whole other topic that I know you guys have covered in the past, but, Beeple's, I talked to him for like an hour this week about, the whole, the success he's had with his NFTs. But think about it from this perspective. He did those renders in Octane. Same thing with Mograph, who's, our collect, right? I mean, all these people are doing these Octane renders, selling an image, but the better version of that, which is how we see, render and Octane and anything really connected together for an open metaverse, is what if the job that he does on render, which you can assign to somebody, the job itself is owned by somebody that's a collector. They can then generate more renders. They could, people can decide how those things get reused. That kind of like, here's how I want my work and my art and my assets to be used interchangeably with other things, is such an important part of that. And NFTs, because they just have popped up and become such a big thing, are a great way to showcase, here's an example where an artist can control the assets and the render itself. So in other words, if you own a render tribe, you don't necessarily download the original C4D file of the assets, but you can control how many times it gets rendered. There's an actual GUID or a URL that is each render, right? So you can essentially have that attribution be listed in there. Those kinds of things are super important. And also, if you are going to bring those things into multiple game engines, having an ability to define this, kind of what USD is doing with rights, with PhysX and the like. Like, imagine having it so you can define how rights are reused, how, let's say, light stage scans that we do for light stage for an actor are used, and we have a partnership again with the agencies like WME. Those are the kinds of things that I think are really fundamental. I would hate it for it to be like the PlayStation or something, where it's like, this is this vertical, this metaverse is closed off from that one, and it's going to be tough. I mean, I think things are stacked against that. You're going to see, a lot of people sort of creating their own little mini 3D worlds, but hopefully we do something better than that. And I think that could, lead to the creation of the next Google or Facebook, and others that started off with the fact that the internet was open and available to everyone. And there weren't any of those barriers in those, in those days. So,
keep sending in questions. Hopefully, I mean, we've covered so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Mark says they're going to be talking about crypto art on the Monday meeting today, which that's in 7 minutes. And next
awesome.
Next week, Beeple's going to be on, so I'm sure we're going to have some heavy conversation about crypto art. One of the questions in the chat was about, this is something that I would like, the separate PSD layers that you can bring in an image. Right now in C4D, you can click on an image, you bring in a texture, and you could say, oh, just bring in my diffuse layer, my specular layer, all that from PSD. Is that something that's coming as well?
We could do that. So we did add support for EXR layers. So you can, when you import an EXR in the core of Octane, you can set that up. So we could do that for PSD. We're using an open source PSD reader inside the core of Octane. I'll take a look into it. It's a great request. I think it would be super useful. Definitely the functionality to do that is there for EXRs. So I think we can work on it, expanding that to PSDs as well. I think it's a very useful feature. I totally agree that that's worthwhile putting near the top of the list.
Did you speak just quickly about someone requesting, because there's been a big request for lights not affecting volumes?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's very high on the list. That is okay. Absolutely. So I mentioned it earlier as well. There's also the ability that we have now you can make a light invisible, but it also shows up. Its shape shows up in the volume, right? And that's something that that is. When it became clear that was a really big blocker in the last 2 months, like people were, everyone was asking us for this. We looked at how much work it is. So it's about 3 weeks in terms of core development work to do. So we're going to try to schedule that towards the end of this year and hopefully get that fixed in place, early next year. And that will, go a long way, I think, towards improving that. Also, light linking volumes, that also is something I know people are looking for. So yeah, that's, I think the very first thing that we'll fix is the actual invisible lights and volumes messing up the actual volume rendering with the shape of that object in there. Like that's something that we know how to fix it. It's 3 weeks of dedicated work, and it's now bubbled up to the top of the list for release after 2020.2, which means it'll be ready, early next year, I think.
Cool.
Man, I don't know if I have anything else left. I don't see any
got
more
nothing
questions
else.
coming in here. We covered a lot. That's a lot to soak in.
I'm really excited about the future of Octane and Brigade and everything that Otoy is offering right now. I absolutely think you guys are killing it, and you know, in this 3D world, you know.
Thank you guys. I mean, no, we love being, you know, part of this community. I mean, it's great. I mean, I truly love seeing what people do with our tools. It's great to sort of provide something that we get immediate feedback on. And I have to say that the Mograph Slack is incredible. I mean, it's changed the way that even I interact with the community. I mean, it's something that, like, I think it was the first time I really, outside of maybe Facebook, started to really get really good feedback on things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our direction is also to take things, you know, beyond even Octane. I mean, Brigade is obviously another renderer, but we also want to create tools like Sculptron, or bring in, you know, also create an ecosystem that is bigger than just Otoy, like, you know, bring in the Embergen team, Django effects, and or Creator and others. And I think there's one more thing that we didn't talk about, which is just one small slide in the GTC deck, which is one thing we want to try to do, to democratize everything further. Like, I think we've done a lot of great work getting a $20 a month sub to give you a lot of value, right?
Yeah.
One thing we want to do, though, is see if we can actually have render token itself at some point, maybe it's 18 months out, be used to pay for your subs. So you can have usage-based licensing that's token-based, which I think will end up being cheaper for a lot more users. But if there's more users, maybe that also is a way to sustain that model. And I feel like that's like, I want to see that happen. I mean, I think, you know, we have these sort of, you know, drop-offs where things are free in one tier and they're $20 in another, and then there's 30 for enterprise and another 10 to get a render node. But, you know, we want to sort of see if we can get those things to be even less, you know, expensive to artists, and have more artists in the community by tokenizing some of that. So that's definitely a thing that we're going to be looking at in the coming months, and certainly in the next year.
Yeah,
that'd be cool. I mean, you know, you set your computer to render for, you know, a day or something, and then you've got your license basically for the next month or something. That'd be cool. That'd be neat.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I have two quick links I just wanted to mention. There, you can find the links to what we're talking about in the show notes, including the GTC 2020 fall presentation in its entirety. And two quick links. I just wanted to say that, and I do not know how to pronounce this name. I'm so sorry. I don't know if it's Lassie Loch, or Lassay. I'm so sorry. Sure. I don't know how to pronounce your name, but there is a Take HUD helper that they put up online if you want to check that out. It looks really cool. It came from a conversation, I think, on the Mograph Slack. And then I also wanted to mention, and Jules, you probably saw this, the South Park creators started this new political satire series.
Deepfakes show. Wow, it's good.
Yeah. Have you watched it?
No, I've only seen clips of it. I haven't had time to sit down and watch it.
It is insane how good the quality is in it.
Yeah. I did note that, and I do want to check it out. But it's just a matter of time, right, before deepfake becomes production ready. You know.
Yeah.
And maybe we're there. You know, which is cool.
Yeah. It's gonna be scary. Yeah. Exactly. Oh yeah, and people are, of course, and I was going to mention this, asking about how to get into the Mograph Slack. If you email us and ask us nicely, remember that we got rules. It's very, we're a positive community. We are, we kind of have our rules, I think, laid out. I think if you go to mograph.com/Slack, you can see the rules. I'm not sure, but the rules are in the Slack. If you go to info@mograph.com, sorry, as the email address, info@mograph.com, and just shoot us an email and ask us if you can join. We'll let you in, but gotta play by the rules, be nice, and yeah, that's about it. That's about it. I'm sure everybody's waiting for it to end so they can go back and rewind it and maybe watch it at like half speed to take it all in. And Jules, we really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah,
it's always so much fun, and we're so glad that you are listening to what everybody is saying and what they're asking for, you know, their requests. I know that it is an absolute just immense amount of information to take in and handle and do updates for, and I have no idea how y'all do it. So
passion and will, but it's, you know, it's again right back at you guys. I mean, the community is great, so it feeds off of that, and it's been it's really exciting to sort of, you know, be able to talk to that many users and get this feedback, and put out releases every few months that incorporate it.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
And we appreciate you and the team being on the Slack. We know there's a lot of y'all on there, and
Yeah.
you know, the fact that y'all are
Yeah.
listening is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if anybody else has any additional questions, you know, feel free, hit us up, get in the Slack, ask questions. There's also the Octane Facebook group. What else is there? There is an Octane
Discord.
subreddit. The Discord.
Yeah, Discord is huge. We officially have a Discord channel now. So there's Octane Discord. There's, of course, Twitter. You can just, you know, direct message me there. But I think I'm pretty active in the Facebook group, obviously on the Mograph Slack, and our Discord channel. I do check in there as well. So, and the forums, you know, that's where you should go if you have specific, you know, bugs or feature requests for developers. That's where there's the most granularity. So those are all the big places to check in for OTOY support.
Cool. Well, you can rate us on iTunes, leave a review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, which goes out every now and then. I'm trying to get one out as soon as we have this new course, mini course announced, so they can go out together. You can say you've been there, done that, got the t-shirt with the Mograph logo tee, the Paul Babb Feel the Babb 2020 shirt. All the profits
The
from
vintage.
that. Vintage.
Vintage
All the profits
now.
from that go to Doctors Without Borders. Now that the election is over, we will be changing the price to $1,000. So make sure that you go get your shirt before it becomes $1,000, because the profit from that goes to Doctors Without Borders. So if you want that shirt, you better get it before we change the price. The Render Things t-shirt, hoodie, and long sleeve tee. The That Render is Fire shirt, which you're only allowed to wear, ironically, unless you're shams. And got a vintage, the vintage throwback Mograph shirt that I'm working on the design for right now as well. It should be coming out soon. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, mograph.com. Come check us out, talk to us in our Slack and things, and we'll see you there. So
yeah.
Jules,
thanks so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
All right, till next time. I'm Dave,
And I'm Matt.
and you're Jules.
And you're Jules.
I'm Jules. Yeah, take care, everyone.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
Later, yo.
All right, stand by.